Today we're talking about why tours are one of the best ways to learn a new city. Welcome to Vacation Mavens, the podcast that brings you travel inspiration and practical tips from two moms who know how to plan the perfect trip.
I'm Tamara from Your Time to Fly.
And I'm Kim from Stuffed Suitcase. With over 40 years of travel experience between us, we're here to share our favorite destinations from road trips to cruising, theme parks, and European adventures.
Whether you're planning a family vacation or a mom getaway, we have the tips and tricks to make memories that will last a lifetime.
Tamara, we have spent quite a few episodes recently. We talked about women's group tours that are like multi-day organized tours, but today we're taking a little different level to tours, and we're talking about more like tours, city tours and activities, day trips, day tours, and how to book them. Some of our tips about what we've learned over the years. So why don't we kick off? How do you want to open this up about what are these tours? What makes them special? Maybe what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, I think you and I have both found that one of the best ways to explore a city is with a tour guide. Like, even if you're planning on having time to do things on your own, it makes sense to start off with some type of tour, just to get the lay of the land, to get a little history, better understand
100%.
the culture. Sometimes then those guides will give you recommendations for restaurants and other tips and things to do. So one of the first things I do, like when I land, is to maybe not the first day, because you never know, like with flights or if you're going to be exhausted, but the first like full day in a place, I like to do some type of a guided tour. And
I agree.
You know, if you're working with a travel advisor like myself, like we often will have people that we know in different cities that we've vetted that were, are good. And sometimes, like, for example, if you're traveling with kids, know someone that's good with kids or good with teens. But if you're not working with a travel advisor, then there are plenty of different ways that you can find these tours. And I think what most people are familiar with are these platforms, which is really like a search engine for tours. So like Viator, for example. Now you can even book things, I think, direct through TripAdvisor, even though TripAdvisor owns Viator. So there's, some kind of booking there. And Get Your Guide is another one. So there are a lot of these platforms where you can go and you can put in your destination city, say Istanbul, and you can even then qualify it with your dates and the type of activities you're looking for. And then you'll see all these different options. You'll see like, oh, you're interested in food tours or a boat tour or something like that. And you can then go through them based on their reviews, you have to go through a lot of different things. But I think a lot of times there's a bit of confusion because people think that they're actually booking with Viator or with Get Your Guide. Because I'll see people like say complaining about, I never work with Viator again. I'm like, it's actually
the tour
operator. And so that's why if you look on those platforms, at some point, they're in different places for different platforms, but they do say who the provider is. So you can always go and Google them directly, look up their reviews. And then there's always reviews on the platform as well. But just understand that when you book a tour like that and you show up, they're not going to be holding a Get Your Guide or Viator sign. They're going to be holding a sign based on their company name.
I agree. And you might also get confused because you might get information about your tour from that third, what you think is a different person than who you booked with. And because that company is then sending you information about like where to show up and special details like that. Most of the time it comes through the Viator platform or Get Your Guide, however you've booked it. But every once in a while, if you hear from the tour operator, I have had a couple of things though, Tamara, where I have not been able to locate the name of the tour operator. Because I know a lot of times you have to expand the details, and there's, like you said, there's a few tricky ways to find it. But a couple times I've been like, I'm not seeing it listed here.
One of them has it at the very top, like right next to the listing. And then one Get Your Guide used to have it at the bottom, but I think they may have moved it. So
I think it's on what to know or something, and you have to expand the details
so
it's tricky.
You have
but
to
I
really
agree.
read through. And I will say, when you're booking these tours, don't make assumptions. Make sure you read the details of what's included, what's not included, because sometimes they'll say, you see, I don't know, I'm thinking of Barcelona, Sagrada Familia, and they just mean you're walking by the outside of it, so like understand what you're going into, what tickets are included. And also like your meeting points, because I know when I was when we were in Istanbul and I was looking to book one of the boat cruises, I was trying to find one that I could easily take a ferry or take a tram to get to so that the meeting place wasn't difficult. So those are all, some things to keep in mind, I think.
I agree. And I was going to say another thing is if you really want to support local and you are able to figure out the platform, if you're trying to save money or if you're interested at all, it might make a good sense to if you do determine who the tour operator is, try and find their own website and see if they offer the tour directly through their own system, because that's going to actually give them more money in their pocket because they're paying, I think, a 40%, 30 to 40%, I don't know, fee to those third party platforms. So it's a good way to think of it is if you use Expedia to book your hotels actually with Hyatt, not Expedia just connected the two. So people get confused about that. It's a good thing to know.
Yeah. And I like your point about supporting, the local providers in that way because it does make a big difference. It's, and the same with like, if you book through Airbnb takes a big cut, for example,
Yeah,
that's the service of the platform and the service of their marketing. But
correct.
yeah,
Yeah. So, what are some of the things I think you gave some really good tips. So, one thing I always like to do is you have to look at the reviews. It's really important to look at what they're rated and look for top rated ones. You can almost always, like when I was going to go do Iceland and I was really looking for different tours, Golden Circle tours, make sure, and even transfers, like airport transfers, things like that, just really read the directions, make sure that the people sound right and
yeah.
everything sounds normal.
And just understand too that some people may be like, we loved Paul, but you may not get Paul, but hopefully if you,
Yeah.
especially if you see like a number of names, hopefully that means everyone on their team is good,
Is trained well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's also good to, again, when you're researching tours, we can talk about this next. I think it's really important to know the number of people that can fit on the tour. A lot of times in
Yes.
those details, it'll say max 25 guests or
Yes.
something like that. And I know I've started recommending for cruise ships. So if anyone's looking for a place to find good cruise tours and you don't want to book directly with the cruise, there's a company called Shore Excursions Group that I've recently joined as an affiliate. And they have a back to ship guarantee, which is the one reason most people don't want to book outside of the cruise ships, but they have a back to ship guarantee and they work with local, I mean, they're a great company, have amazing reviews. And they also have like free cancellation if there's issues. So they're
Yeah.
really great. And one thing I love about their site is they say if it's like a small group, a private, or a standard group size,
Mm,
and even their standard group might be 15 to 25, and their small group might be, 6 to 15. And so I think that's some really important to look at.
definitely. Definitely. I also sometimes book through Project Expedition, and they
Okay.
also have a back to ship or whatever it's called
Yep.
guarantee, or at least on some of their, so you can see whether or not that's included on that particular activity or tour.
Yeah.
So another good option, yeah, because the whole stress of missing getting back to the ship, that's nobody wants that. Nobody wants that.
Yeah. I mean, it's happened, I think, to people before, but yeah.
Yeah.
So anyways, so just make sure that's something to look at as we talked about, the reviews, look at how well they're rated, then also looking at the size of the groups. What else do you think you said things that are included? Do you want to mention like tickets and that sort of thing as well?
Yeah, usually it'll mention if you are going inside something that it includes the tickets. I know I forget, maybe it was when we were in Chile, it included this, but you'd have to buy this on your own. Just, understand what those inclusions or whatever are. And just also know, I've run across this a couple times, but they'll often show you the price, but you need to sometimes make sure you put in your date because it may vary depending
Yeah.
on what date you're going because everyone uses dynamic pricing these days, so it's like more expensive on the weekends or things like that. And the price that they're first listed maybe doesn't always include tax and things like that. So your total price, if you really want to make sure you're within the budget, you have to go through the checkout process to understand what the full picture looks like.
Yeah. And I would say, depending on what your budget is, also don't be scared to look, especially if you're traveling like a group of four or something. Don't be afraid to look at private group tours because it might be a little bit more money, but the experience will be more personalized and you might be able to slip in an extra. We really want to spend more time
Yeah.
here. Or so that's something to consider as well. And again, if you're looking on those platforms, they'll have all the private stuff listed. But if you can see who it's with direct, I mean, Tamara, you and I both know that we really liked working with Hidden Iceland, and they recently went back to their bespoke private tours kind of thing. So just be aware that in different countries and destinations, there's these tour companies, tour operators that you can book directly with. So
Yeah, should we
that's
talk
something that's
about
good.
some of our go-to places if we're not looking like to book on a platform, but looking to book direct, like for example, like food tours or other like walking tours or museum tours, things like that. What are some, go-to other options for you?
Yeah, I don't have too many. I know there's like tours by locals that I've looked at that, and then most of the ones I've done have been through the third party platforms, or Live Tours is the one who I've used before. And I love them because they have the small group tour sizing. And I was actually looking at them for a recent trip in Paris. There's also Tour Guy, which I've heard of, and I have not used them yet. So that's just
Yeah.
another platform that kind of helps collaborate. But I think you have probably a little more experience on that. So why don't you toss that up and tell everyone? I know you're a big food tour person.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, what kind of things have you looked
Yeah.
at?
Well, we had way, way back, we had Angelo from Live Tours, which used to be Live Italy, on the podcast to talk about some tours because they started in Italy and now they are in Spain and Paris and London and some other places. And yeah, I do that they're usually a 6-person small group. One of the others, I have used the tour guide. They also started in Italy, so they have a strong base there. But I use walks. It used to be like
Oh
take
yeah, that's
walks
right.
or walks of Italy. Walks
Mhm.
now it's just like walks or take walks. Really good experiences with them. And we did a tour of the Louvre. It was like Mona Lisa at her best or something like that. But it was the very end of the day. So you did like a highlights of the Louvre, ending with Mona Lisa when everyone else was like almost gone. And our
Yeah.
guide was exceptional. He was really good. But I will say their small groups are more like 12, I think. Yeah, so everyone's definition of small group varies. For food tours, I have used both Eating Europe, which used to be Eating
Okay.
Italy, and but my go-to recently has been Devour Tours.
Devour. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that they have some in the US, like they have some in Boston, but they also have some in Spain, Portugal, Italy, various other places. So again, it's another great place to go and check out. There's also yeah, there's been some other food tour companies that I've worked with and they're not coming to me off the top of my head, but you can always Google like local tour guides in,
Yeah.
or if you know what you're looking for, to try to find that. And sometimes there are people that do more adventure stuff, or like
Yeah.
there's a company that we used in Croatia to do like a private boat tour and they also did various other things. So there's a lot of options out there.
I know there's also, I can't think of what the site was, but I had been looking at this in Japan when we were planning that trip. And there are these sites where you can basically hire a guide. And so that can be a little different than just a tour itself. So if you want to have a guide be able to drive you around for the day, do you know what the site I'm thinking of that is
Well,
with?
the one that I've used, which is somewhat similar, is called Day Trip. And
Yes.
but Day
Okay.
Trip is not a guide, it is just a driver. But it's a
Driver.
nice way if you do want to take a day trip. Say you're staying in Florence and you want to take a day trip to Siena and also stop in Chianti, like you're going these
Yeah, you've
different
done that.
things.
Yep.
So you have a driver bring you to the downtown, then you takes, whatever time you've said,
Stops
like an
along the
hour
way.
or 2 hours to go, and then they'll bring you to the next place, then they bring you back. So it's a nice way if you're looking for having a driver for the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what it is. I can't remember. And then I also know there's one, if I recall, you might know it better. It got pretty popular where it was like a pay what you want, like the walking
Yeah,
tours. Do you
you
remember
can
that
you
one?
can basically Google like free walking tours in Dublin or free walking tours
Yeah.
in something. And there
There's one in Reykjavik, I know,
yeah,
because
there
I
are a
was
lot
on
of
it. Yep.
those where it is I can't remember who organizes it, but you can join and the guides want tips, of course, or
Yep.
you can pay what you think is appropriate, but there are a lot of options out there for that as well.
So we've talked a little bit about how we're choosing the tours. Let's talk about showing up to the tour, things to bring and pack and wear, and then of course tipping. We'll get into that at the end. But any tips for showing up to the tour, making sure you get to the right place?
They will always send you an email with a confirmation that gives you the meeting place. And many times they'll include a photo, they'll include a link to a Google map, and they'll include a description. So no excuses for not getting
Yeah.
there. But they really emphasize to be there 10 to 15 minutes before the tour leaves because they just want to make sure everyone is there. They don't want anyone standing around waiting on someone else. And I used to think, oh, but they're going to start where they start and they're going to stand there and talk for a while. So if you show up 2 minutes late, but a lot of times they're meeting at a place that's convenient and then they're immediately walking somewhere else. Show up on time, you're being left behind, and many of them will have a policy like no, you can't catch up, So make sure, I would say
Wow.
I make sure I put in my itineraries like the contact information for the tour guide just in case something happens and you are running late, and then the meeting point and all of those details.
Yeah. It is something that's a little tricky sometimes to figure out. Like I remember when I was doing the live tour one in Rome for a food tour and we had to meet at a special fountain. I even asked the hotel, like, do you know where and they were confused. They didn't even know that fountain. Thankfully, Google Maps knew the fountain. But so don't rely on locals or local taxis always knowing everything. I mean, if you've watched Amazing Race, you'll know that local taxis don't always know everything. Just maybe do a little pre-scouting when they send that information. Make sure you know where it is on the map and it looks correct based on the street view or whatever. And yeah,
I
I would
tend
just say,
to map it ahead of time, save it in
yeah,
Google Maps, because then
you
when
have the offline.
when
Yeah.
yeah, and when either when you're offline or just when you're doing a search, if it's something that you've looked up before or saved before, it pops up sometimes. So yeah.
Yeah. And I will say I am always mad at the people. I'm always an on-time person, so I'm always mad at the people who don't show up early, and then I'll have a side eye for them the rest of the trip.
We booked a private tour in Milan with our friends when we were there, and I we were walking to meet the guide, and we were about 5 minutes early, and I'm getting calls from the company like, where are you, where are you? And I'm like, we're like a minute away, but it's first of all, it's a private tour, and it's not
Yeah.
leaving for it's not supposed to leave for another 5 minutes. And so we got there, and the guide was like, oh, I don't know if we're going to get into the cathedral now. And I'm like, and I showed her my confirmation. I'm like, it says, I don't know, 3:30, and
Yeah.
you're saying I was supposed to be here at 3. And granted, like 3:15, and then halfway through the tour, I guess she had called the company, and she was like, "Oh, actually, I was supposed to be here at 3:15." And I was
Oh,
like, "Okay, so stop
that makes
yelling
a
at
little
me."
more sense because if
Yeah.
people show up early,
Right.
somebody should be there. Like,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, I've shown up to a spot and the guide was not there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, am I in the right spot? And then pretty soon they showed up.
Yeah.
So,
I've had that
yeah.
too, where they were like
Yeah.
on their phone, and I don't know, and then finally they pull out their sign. I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I've been sitting right next to you the whole time."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when we were in Istanbul, you and it was really easy to see the people, but then they had us split off into different groups and we were on a
Yeah.
different
Track.
colors.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thankfully they
I
let
will
us
say
do
the other
that.
thing
But
to look at, just going back to our things to look at when you're booking the
yeah,
tour, is that they don't always end at the same place. In fact, often they the same
often
place.
they don't. Yep.
And I heard some complaints about this when we were in Croatia. The people booked a boat tour that kind of went out of one port and came back to another, and then they had to find like a taxi back into town or something. So
And they weren't
just,
prepared for that.
yeah, no, they weren't. So
Yeah.
just read the details. Yeah.
Yeah. And on the Viator and Get Your guide, it says very clearly like the meeting point and your end point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely look for those kind of things. I think for when you're on the trip, it's always good to know. I mean, when we were in Istanbul, they made sure to say have a scarf if you're for the ones when
Right.
we were going into the mosques and stuff. And then good walking shoes, of course. Maybe hand sanitizer, hand wipes, especially for food tours. So you can clean your
Yes. Yeah,
hands when you're going to
definitely.
be eating.
And they need a hat if it's out. If you're going to see the Colosseum, you need a hat, you need water, you know.
Yeah.
But also
Yeah.
pay attention to what you can't bring, because sometimes it'll limit, like you can't bring a large backpack or something like that, depending on
Right.
what sites you're going into.
Yeah, because some museums don't let you have that in. There's nowhere to check it. Yeah. And another good thing is to not overcompensate if you're doing like walking tours or food tours and stuff. If you do have mobility issues, please don't sign up for a thing where you're going to be walking for 3 miles. Make
Yeah.
sure you read the details for that as
And
well.
that's where I would recommend a private tour and having a conversation ahead of time to make sure that the guide is aware, so they can plan out places where you can stop and rest, and you can go at your own pace. You're not on someone else's schedule.
Yeah. Let's talk about tipping and then maybe we'll close out with some of our most memorable kind of tours we've taken and
Sure.
maybe tours that you can book that people don't always think of. I have one or two in mind, but let's talk about tipping. What's your standard protocol for when you're tipping for these kind of things?
Yeah, I guess a little bit different if it's group versus private, because, group, you hope everyone in the group is tipping. So I look at maybe a 10% or a 20% for a tour is high.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just like a $5
Yeah.
and then if it's private, I've tend to do more like dollars or €10 like per person.
Per person.
Something sometimes 20. I'm trying to think if I did 20. I don't think it was 20 per person. I think it was more like 10 per person. What
Yeah.
about you? Does that sound right? I always get so nervous saying tipping things. Am I
Yeah, I
cheap?
know.
Am I
No.
not?
I typically don't do a percentage. I think that's just a weird thing to do
Yeah, I
because
agree.
I just think it's more like the time they spent, and I'm assuming they're being paid a normal wage.
Right.
So I typically tip based on how hard, in my mind, how hard they worked. Like a private where they're talking the whole time, they're helping like adjust their schedule to make sure they're moving the shuttle up to get you, things like that. Like you might do 20 per person or something if it's a full day tour. But if it's a half day tour, I'm like you, about $10 a person.
Yeah, that's the how long is it, right? Is it a
Yeah,
2 hour walking
exactly.
tour? Is it a half
Yeah.
day or is it a full day?
And then my other issue I always have, and this is where I have trouble, is when they stick you on a shuttle and you have a driver,
Oh, I
and
know.
then you
Yeah.
also have the tour guide. Because I'm
Yeah.
always like, are they sharing the tip? Do I tip the driver? Then you tip the tour guide separately. And so you need to have a five in case
Right.
there's a driver tipping as well. I just have that handy. The biggest thing about when you're taking these kind of trips and you're planning tours, just have a bunch of fives and tens at your disposal. You need fives anyways, like for housekeeping, in my opinion. So that's something I've stared trying to remember to bring
I've
when I'm
seen a
booking them.
couple
Yeah.
recently that hand out a card where they're like, here's where you can leave a review. And there's also a
Venmo
Venmo
link.
QR code, you know,
Yeah,
which I don't blame them because it's hard to always have the cash available. And, you
absolutely.
know, there's a lot of cultures where it's not common, you know, it's not a standard protocol, but I think especially when they see Americans, there's an
Yeah.
expectation
I think
of,
there's a huge expectation
yeah,
on organized tourist tours that you're held to the American standard.
yeah, and
So I know, I think it's Australians always, I was on a trip once and they're just like, you Americans, why do you tip? You already paid for the tour.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
And I will say, when I was on like the Ama Waterways river cruise, they recommended like a certain amount for the driver and a certain amount for the
Uh,
guide. And when we did the Peru tour, Hannah and I, you know, that's obviously a multi-day. And
yep.
they recommended something for the guide, something for the driver. And I was
Yep.
more than happy to give to the driver because I felt like
You
I
said
could
that.
have
Yeah.
died if he
Yeah.
was a bad driver. Yeah.
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 And I would say the biggest thing to remember is it is tips. So it's so bad that we've gotten into this where we feel like we're obligated. I mean, if you didn't enjoy the tour and
Right.
your tour guide was grumpy and not able to answer your questions and stuff, don't, you already paid for the tour. So, in my opinion, tipping should be as a thank you because you really enjoyed the experience and you just want to give them a little extra instead of just their hourly wage. So,
I agree.
I'm going to
Yeah.
leave it at that.
Yeah.
One thing I was thinking that I'm trying to remember now. Oh, yeah. One thing I think it would be fun to talk about is some of our favorite tours. One of mine has actually been with you because it was, I think, my first organized food tour was when you and I did the Florida Keys food tour.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, it opened my eyes up to that aspect. I've done walking tours and things like that, like history tours. But even when I was going to be in Dublin, it was funny because there was a Dublin donut tour, and I was like, that's fun. I almost booked it by myself. And then there was also like a bus tour that did high tea. But that food tour we did in the Florida Keys, I really liked it. And one of the things I liked is I think it gave me a good layout for that area when we
Yeah,
were walking
for
around. And then
sure.
restaurants I wanted to go back to. I remember that macaroni and cheese we
Oh,
had. And
yeah. Yeah.
our guide was amazing. Rose was just, I even remember the name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he
So
was amazing.
he was good. But
Well,
yeah.
yeah, I would say the food tours are definitely tend to be the most memorable. Our first one that we did was in Rome. I think Hannah was 10, and we did Eating Italy. We did a food tour and it was fabulous. And I will say, I've
Nice.
done so many food tours now. They're not all the same. One in Bologna, and it was terrible. It was just like, here's a market, here's a piece of pizza, here's, you know,
Yeah.
it didn't feel localized. You know, and I
Yeah.
understand that there's some places that you go where the food tour is going to really represent the food of that region. And I've done a food tour in Wilmington, North Carolina. Like, you know, there might be
Yeah.
some specialties there, but generally it's more
Yeah.
pointing out the good restaurants, and then you're learning about the different chefs and their approaches and some of that kind of thing. And it's
Yeah.
not always just about learning like the regional cuisine. Um,
Yeah. I did a live tours food tour in Rome and I thought it was good. And I think they did a good job of finding little spots, but feel like they definitely hit a lot of the tourist area spots. But in Rome, I think it's all mixed together anyways.
yeah.
And then I did one in Nashville and I thought Nashville was fun because like we had this random hot dog,
Yeah.
like
Did you
food
go to
truck.
Eat Walk Nashville or something? Yeah,
Yes.
I did
Yep.
that one too.
Exactly. Yeah. And then they had a cocktail drink, I think at one. And then we also had, of course, Nashville hot chicken.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I almost feel like no matter what your interest, you can find a tour that kind of fits that. Like I've done
Yeah.
like on location tours, for example. I've done one of
Yes, on
theirs in
location.
Boston. They have them in
Yeah.
New York. They have them all over the place
Yep.
where it's basically taking you to filming sites. So if you're
Yep.
really into, TV and movies, like a friend of mine came with me who's like a big TV person, so she was really
Yeah.
excited to get to see some of those settings. There's also, I mean, I've done a beer tour in Boston. There's
Yeah.
so
The
many
brewery tours,
different
so
like
many.
specialty, especially if you go to places like London, you can do the Jack the Ripper tour and the Sherlock Holmes
Yeah.
tour and the Beatles tour and the street art tour. And, there's so many things. You can
Yep.
even book shopping tours,
Yeah.
someone that will help you, especially if you go into a place like Florence, maybe where you want to see like the artisans, like who's the really good leather maker,
Yep.
things like that. Yeah. And we've talked a lot about tours, but there are also like activities. We've done a cooking class in a few different places. One of our favorites was in Marrakesh, where they actually gave us like a shopping
I
list and
remember you
some
saying that you had to
money.
go into the
We went to
market.
the
Yeah.
market, came back to someone's home and cooked, and then we had to walk our bread through the Medina to the baker and then go back and get it. So it was like such a very
Really
real,
immersive.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
That is so cool. That one sounds amazing. Yeah, just keep in mind it's not always like walking around learning. Like it can be the hands-on
Yeah.
activities. I'm trying to think. I mean, we've done with Epic helped us book that sunset
Oh, the
boat
private
tour
sunset in
in yeah, the
Lisbon.
private in Lisbon, and that was just fabulous. And
Yeah,
that
you
was
can
a
really
nice
use these things
activity
to have
experience.
very special experiences where you are. And I think don't overlook things like museums. Like I said, we loved the Louvre tour, and that is such a huge museum. It's a lot to take in. There's no way you're going to see it all. So to have someone help guide you through, and I know a lot of people, I will bring up a couple of other things. If tours are not in your budget, there are a number of resources. So there's GPS My City,
Yeah.
which is something that you do pay for it, but you can like download an audio tour and then everyone can share it, using headphones or whatever. And there's also Rick Steves has a number of audio tours. I've also seen some people do audio tours on Voice Map. So it's another app that you can download and search and see if there's some audio tours. Like I was going to use one in Paris when we were there because there's a podcast that I listened to about, I can't think of the name of the podcast, but it was like travel in France or something like that. And she has done a number of audio tours in different places. So,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think that's another thing is you can look it up and there are apps that do this, like you said, GPS My City, but also some tourism bureaus have free walking tours like listed
right.
on their sites and stuff. So if you are trying to save money and not book one of these, you can look into those, like what setups local tourism boards have.
Yeah. I just find it's so much, you'll get so much more out of exploring a place if you learn a little bit about it. And it,
I
like you
agree.
said, it's not all learn history. These tour guides really do try to make it fun, but also
Yeah.
you need context for what you're seeing.
I agree. I think you learn these little gems that I think just make you appreciate the city more as opposed to just, oh, I'm just walking along more streets and eating food. You can get a feel for what makes maybe the city unique. So I think that's it. Do you have anything final to share about booking like day tours,
I don't
activities?
think so. I feel like,
I think we covered a lot.
yeah, there are a lot. Maybe one other that I just popped into my mind
Yeah.
is called With Locals.
Oh, yeah.
And there's
I,
also one called
yeah.
Eat With. So I think both of
Okay.
those you can basically book to have a meal at a local's home,
Oh,
and so
yep.
at least Eat With is, those are a couple more. They popped into my head, so I wanted to share
Yeah.
those too.
I know there's that trendy one in Japan where you can rent the old, I literally think it's Rent an Old Man or something is the name of the
Mm,
site. I'm not even joking. And it went viral on social media and you can actually, and they say it helps keep people engaged and share
that's
kind of
nice.
their country. It's a funny thing that I remember about
Yeah.
Japan. So I have to think about it. If you guys know, you
It's
can,
like Rent a Grandpa or
message
something.
us. Yeah, it's like something like that.
That's
But yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you guys for joining us. And as always, we love and really appreciate if you would leave us a review if you haven't already, or share this podcast with a friend.
Thanks. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and rate and review on your favorite podcast app, as that helps other people discover us. And if you want to see more, follow me, Tamara, at Your Time to Fly on Instagram and Facebook and all the others.
And you can follow me, Kim, at Stuff Suitcase on Instagram, Facebook, and of course, my blog.